This week's episode is sponsored by OM System.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Derek Fassbender.
Welcome, listeners. I'm Derek Fassbender, host of the B&H Photography Podcast.
And I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast's senior creative producer.
And I'm Mike Weinstein, the show's technical producer and audio engineer.
Photographs speak volumes. While daily life is transitory, images resonate long after the scene has shifted and the subjects pictured are gone and forgotten. This is an apt summary of today's show, featuring a pair of photographers and visual historians who are passionate about unearthing stories from our country's past and preserving photographs that keep us in touch with this history. We'll introduce you in a minute, but first, some background about each of our guests. Alan Govenar is an acclaimed photographer, filmmaker, writer, and folklorist. A 2010 Guggenheim Fellow and the author of more than 40 books, Alan is also founder and president of the organization Documentary Arts, which he created to spotlight marginalized voices and cultures through projects such as the Texas African American Photography Archive. As a filmmaker, Alan has produced and directed documentaries in association with Nova, Arte, and PBS. And as a playwright, he has written and produced musicals that have been performed from New York City to major venues across Europe. This year marks some major milestones in Alan's career, with a photography retrospective at the Center for Photography at Woodstock, a new documentary film premiering at New York Cinema Village, and the publication of 3 new books, including Kinship and Community, released by Aperture. Adam Forgash is a photographer, filmmaker, photo history specialist, and proud former Oklahoman. In 2023, while foraging for visual treasures at New York's famed Chelsea Flea Market, Adam happened upon the archive of the undiscovered portrait photographer Sidney J. Tyler. From 1913 to 1943, Tyler operated a photo studio in Afton, Oklahoma, making portraits of everyday subjects as they passed through the region during a break in their travels along Route 66, otherwise known as the Mother Road. This once-lost visual history of Northeast Oklahoma features working-class people of all races and communities, including the famed Tuskegee Airmen. After 2 years of intensive research into Tyler's archive, Adam's project, now titled Faces of the Mother Road, The Lost Portraits of S.J. Tyler, a Route 66 story, is poised to make a lasting impact on Oklahoma's visual and historical narrative, just in time for the centennial of Route 66 in 2026. Alan Govenar and Adam Forgash, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Alan, we're going to start with you. You are primarily trained as a folklorist. You have multiple degrees in folklore and anthropology. I want to know when photography entered the picture for you, and how has this process of making images and working with photographs informed your work as a whole?
I began making photographs when I was 10 years old. My father had gotten a science kit for my brother, and he never opened it. And it was a little kit that had a camera that used half-inch film, and there were a bunch of cardboard tubes and lenses, and it was a build-your-own darkroom kit. So those were my first photographs. Of course, once I used up that one little roll of film, there was no more film to be bought for that camera. I didn't get my first 35 millimeter camera until I was 21. And when I got that camera, I set out to make photographs. And I was in the middle of taking a folklore class at Ohio State University. It was 1973. And I wandered off campus one night and saw a sign that said tattooing by the ancient teacher of the art, as ancient as time, as modern as tomorrow. And I went back the next day with my camera, but when I started making photographs, the tattoo artist, who was a hunchbacked dwarf in a wheelchair, shouted out at me to get away from the front of the shop. So I wandered off and I came back, and he said I could come in now. And he scolded me for not asking permission to make his photograph. And he went on to describe how He had been deprived in education because it was considered too grotesque to go to school, but he was self-sufficient. Then he took a pistol hidden in his wheelchair and slammed it on his desk in front of him and emptied out the bullets and said, "These are hollow point bullets. You know what they do? They shatter when they enter the body." And he did everything he could to kind of scare me off, but he realized that I was sincere in what I was trying to do. And this man walked into the tattoo shop and said he wanted a tattoo. And it was a skull with a dagger through it with the inscription, "Death Before Dishonor." And Stoney looked at this man and said, "Haas, you're not afraid to let this boy make your picture, are you?" And that began my work as a photographer.
Wow. I think that's the best origin story I've had yet for a photographer in asking that question.
Yeah, I'm not even going to answer that question.
I'm sorry if I rambled on.
No, that was worth every single second of that explanation.
You guys still in touch?
Well, actually, I wrote this paper for my class. It became a journal article. I went off to graduate school in 1974. And while I was a graduate student, I was still interested. I mean, at that point, tattooing was largely seen as social deviance. And I began to understand tattooing in a more deep way in terms of it being an art form. And over the course of the last, nearly 50 years, some of my work, not all of it, it's been documenting how tattooing, which was perhaps the most forbidden art form in the Western world, has become the most common. But it was a visual and film wellspring. So I left graduate school in 75 and went back and worked in earnest to do a book about Stoney. In the middle of doing the book, I had the idea to make a movie. I'd never made movies before. And I admired the filmmaker, Les Blank. And through my collaborator, Pacho Lane, I met Les, and he became the cameraman for my first film, which was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts in the late 1970s. However, I began to get a lot of pushback for documenting a subject that was demeaned largely, certainly within the art world at that point, and seen as socially deviant. By then, I was teaching part-time at an art college in Columbus, Ohio, and the college agreed to be the fiscal sponsor for my NEA grant on the condition that they never received a credit in the final movie.
Huh. Wow.
And it took me probably 4 years to do the book, another couple of years for it to get published. It was finally published in 1981. By then, Stoney had passed away. And my film that I did with Les Blank and Pacho Lane premiered at Film Forum in New York City. And it showed the following spring as part of the new director's series at MoMA. And it very much launched my career. So while folklore is in a way defined an early part of me academically, I've always seen myself as an interdisciplinary artist.
Interesting. And it's that mix of these mediums in telling stories that obviously over the length of your career, it's been one thing versus the next. I'm kind of interested in how media has changed over the years. How did that affect you in telling stories?
Well, media has always impacted what I do. I work in different media because I focus on different subjects. For me, the subjects define the medium. So early on, photography was primary. The world of Stoney's tattoo shop in this Appalachian migrant neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, was a visual cornucopia. I tried to become a photographer. I learned how to make pictures because I was constantly immersed in an environment where I had open access because Stoney trusted me and wanted to be part of what I was doing. But it was a counter narrative. It was during the time when David Lynch was making his Elephant Man movie, and Elephant Man for Stoney was just a fiction because he was part of this community of circus and sideshow freaks, as they're called. But for him, What was most important was that I would write his obituary for Amusement Business magazine and describe him as first and foremost an actor on the outdoor stage. So I learned to become a documentary filmmaker, but my work, while it's focused largely on film and photography, for me, documentary is very open-ended. And so I've published a couple of novels. I have a new novel that was just published in May called Come Round Right that I started when I was 18. It's my second novel. I've published a collection of poems. I've published plays and have created new musicals based on books of mine. So I've had a very free-form career. But the media, getting back to that, I began with analog photography. I started making movies with the Stoney Portapak unit, which was like reel-to-reel tape. Then got every generation of video cameras, bought a 16 millimeter camera with my cinematographer, transformed that to Super 16, and got other cameras as high definition evolved. I now use my iPhone as a movie camera, but photographically, I have a Hasselblad 2XD. I try to get the latest, newest with each generation because I want to explore those media.
I love that, getting the most out of it now. Adam, I want to bring you into the conversation here. Obviously, you're a photographer and a filmmaker, but I want to know about when you came across that loose envelope in 2023 and you were browsing through thousands of glass plate negatives. What was it about this group of materials that stuck out to you and was something that you wanted to explore more?
Well, I've been working at the New York City flea market for about 32 years. And I had to move back from Tulsa to find these glass negatives that turned out to be from Tulsa. So there was just this weird connection. And I went in on a day when I wasn't really supposed to be there. And the person who was my arch enemy at the flea market, because we're all a little bit crazy, had this booth full of 8,000 glass negatives. And I've never seen him with anything like that. And everybody saw me coming and they're like, oh God. So I went up to him and I said, how much for everything? And he gave me a price and I said, yes. And everybody walked out kind of cursing me under their breath. And I started going through them. And one of the last groups that I went through were these 2,000 to 3,000 5x7 glass negatives. And at first it was like, oh, these are baby portraits. These are kind of boring. I'm a little jaded from doing this for a long time. But then I noticed that there was like an indigenous family and they weren't dressed up like they did back in the period. Not that they made them look like clowns, but they kind of overdid it. And this was regular families, Native American, Caucasian, Spanish mix, and they were dressed in their Sunday best. They looked happy. They didn't look intimidated because this was the 20s, the teens, the 20s, and the 30s. And that part of the country, you usually just see pictures of, WPA style, like Dorothea Lange. And you don't see a lot of pictures of indigenous people or mixed people in studio looking happy or looking proud. So it kind of blew my mind. And I started looking through more and more and more. And I eventually found this little envelope that said S.J. Tyler, Afton, Oklahoma, and no address. And I started going online and there was no information. So I realized that I had just found this treasure trove that maybe nobody has seen in 100 years or 80 years. And then I really dove into it. And I found out that this guy was only an hour and 15 minutes from where I used to live in Tulsa. And it took me to come back to New York to find it, which I thought was kind of mind-blowing. I've spent the last 2 years on it, pretty much every day, trying to find any history about the man, the photo studio, the people. So it's been pretty wild.
That is pretty wild. What does that process look like? I mean, where do you even begin? I know we have the internet now. It's made everything a heck of a lot easier and faster, but where do you start? What's the process like?
I have a barn. I brought everything back there. I just started pulling broken pieces of glass out. I mean, there were 8,000 negatives. So I didn't know that they were just one person's work or three people's work, because there were medical oddity negatives from Germany from the 20s. There were sports photos from a guy in Boston who was kind of a Ouija-esque photographer, who also was the Red Sox photographer. There was all sorts of strange processes. And by the time I got to this last group, because I knew there was continuity, I knew they were together. But the weird part is, at the end, I found African-American airmen. And I couldn't figure out, because I thought he had stopped before World War II. So when I finally connected it, I spent like every day going through the plates, trying to separate the plates, handling them so they wouldn't get hurt. There was a lot of damage. There was a lot of degradation. So I basically just spent days looking through these wonderful old negatives. It's pretty wild to discover something that people haven't seen before and that has cultural relevance and was from a road that people traveled before it was called Route 66. And the fact that African Americans were driving this road without the Green Book and actually being showed respect by this guy. So it was just exciting for me, because I'm a photo nerd, and this is what I love.
Alan, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Adam's project, given your experience with organizations like Documentary Arts and the Texas African American Archive. And if you could, give us a little bit of backstory on the archive itself.
This is an amazing story. In 1995, artist Flea and I founded the Texas African American Photography Archive. And this was an outgrowth of work that I had started in the 1980s. In 1984, I had had a commission from the Dallas Museum of Art to do a project called Living Texas Blues. And I was looking for the work of Black photographers. It was a commission that included a small book and 3 films. And 2 notable curators were doing a 2-volume history of Texas photography. And there was not a single Black photographer represented in the book. And when I asked them why, they said, to their knowledge, there were none in existing collections, which meant that in 1984, there were no known Black photographers, when certainly there were. But it led me on a quest similar to yours. And I started going through Black business directories and looking for the names of photographers. And eventually, over time, was able to identify generations of Black photographers who were interconnected. And the archive now has more than 60,000 images in it.
It's amazing.
And it was a very similar kind of research project. I've written a lot about this idea of community photography, because in a way, what you're describing in this photographer that you happened upon, he was a community photographer, and it included a vast range of people. And it was a kind of photography that obviously goes back to the period that you're focusing on with these glass plate negatives and tintypes and daguerreotypes. But many of the photographers in this archive were either self-taught. Some of them learned photography while they were in the military. Some of them were able to buy secondhand 4x5 speed graphics cameras, the news cameras. And like you, we spent many hours going through thousands of negatives, because the photographers at that time were in their 70s and 80s. They had mainly been service photographers. Their bread and butter had been segregated schools. With integration, they lost the school contracts. Many of them were just struggling and still working in these communities, but largely the studios were closing.
This wasn't a Black photographer, by the way. He was Caucasian. I have found Black photographers. There's way more than anybody ever thought. But in this case, I was impressed because he was colorblind in the way he looked at everybody. And you could see it in the pictures.
Well, I understand that this was not a Black photographer, because in a lot of small towns, if you were African American, the only place that you could afford to have a picture made of yourself or your family, there were no Black photographers.
Exactly.
It also went the other way. If you look at the daguerreotypist J.P. Ball, who is renowned today as a Black portrait daguerreotypist, he did many daguerreotypes of people who weren't Black because he was working in Montana. There weren't a lot of photographers in general. So Black photographers also had white subjects.
Of course.
The ones that I was focusing on were largely Black community photographers. But the dynamic of that, I think, if there's white or Black, is that photographers, through their client base and this kind of service photography, develop this community network. And frequently, photographers of this nature, I think, are involved in their communities.
I just thought all of this work was from Afton, people who lived in this little Route 66 town. And I went out there with a film crew and we talked to the senior citizens and we showed photos. And when we started showing photos of the diversity, they kind of looked at us like we were crazy. They didn't say anything racist or negative. They just had this look on their face. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, we were a sundown town." Which means that there were signs on all three entrances to the town that said, pretty much, if you're Black, you'll be in the ground if you're here past sundown, And it kind of blew our mind because being from the East Coast, I had heard the term, but I've never actually seen people who were still alive who remembered the signs. So I started to realize that these people weren't from Afton. They were people that were driving this route, this artery, in the middle of America and just stopping. And a lot of them had names on them. And I couldn't find any of these names relating to Afton except for maybe one. So I learned a lot. And then it shifted to becoming more about this time in America, this history that maybe people didn't know. From this northeast corner of Oklahoma that was really Cherokee country.
The storytelling is what fascinates me. I mean, at the core, regardless of medium, you guys are both storytellers.
Right.
And what's so interesting about this is that in a lot of capacities, we talk about storytelling in the current. Well, I'm telling a story. I'm going out to start a project and I'm starting from now. And what's so interesting about this is going back. There's a historical context that you may not have all the pieces. It's figuring things out backwards and reverse engineering.
Exactly.
I'm kind of interested, especially with you, Alan, with your background in studying folklore and anthropology. Are there guidelines to the research and preservation? What are the rules? How do you go about these things?
In part, what appealed to me about folklore was the people who were folklorists that I met. And they tended to be people who worked in different areas. In terms of being an academic discipline, folklore was slow to emerge, to become part of university studies. There are still very few, relatively speaking, universities that offer courses in folklore. So folklore is very open-ended. The subject of folklore, however, is time-honored and has existed for centuries. So it was surprising to me when I started studying folklore that there was so little emphasis placed upon photography and filmmaking, and things were starting to change. I suppose that's considerably different now that video is taken over. But even you look at the work of Margaret Mead, she was not a very good photographer. There are photographs of hers, and she did a lot of different kinds of documentary work. But it's difficult to say. I don't know if you're familiar with an online magazine that Documentary Art started. It's called truthinphotography.org. And we developed this in association with Magnum Photos, Aperture, and the International Center of Photography. It's an international online magazine which attracts all kinds of photographers. And in fact, the project you're doing with this photographer from Oklahoma would make a great piece on truth in photography. But it's an open-ended forum, and we feature the work of high school photographers. We feature the work of Magnum photographers, most recently Larry Towle. And it's become very international. We get submissions we had one group of photographs that came from a Rohingya refugee camp outside Myanmar. We've done 3 features on Maxim Dundiuk, a Ukrainian photographer. And we've done work in Poland and other countries, Italian photographers, German photographers. Most recently, we've done a piece with a photographer who documents refugees living in the middle of the Mediterranean. But these issues, in terms of what we can learn from the past, are critical in a world that visual evidence is so often drawn into question. And with each of our editions in Truth in Photography, we have different individuals who write pieces about truth in photography is. And it is everything from being a fiction to being a very hard document that people don't want to see.
It's such a deep conversation as well. There's always this accountability of the photographer. You have a single frame or a number of frames to tell a story. Is there maybe perhaps a greater weight when you're taking someone's entire body of work and you have to figure out what the story is, or are you telling the right story? This whole idea of truth in photography, that has to weigh heavily upon resurrecting a work and giving it legs or giving it a voice that it never had.
Certainly the archive that you've developed of these glass plate negatives sounds completely remarkable.
They're wonderful.
But to say that it's the complete work is difficult. I mean, photography is the most democratic of all art forms. Anyone can make photographs. You think about in today's world, there are probably 1 trillion or more photographs made every year.
But what do you mean the complete work?
Well, in terms of, it's difficult to know unless you have someone who really kept everything together. Some photographers don't save things. So if you found something that documents it as being complete, it makes it even more extraordinary.
No, I found the other half of the collection by mistake in Pennsylvania, where the guy was from. And that's why this thing just keeps giving me the chills, because every week I get another phone call going, oh, did you know Bob in New Hampshire has 6 of these? And the stories keep coming out. So the complete work, I have 1913 and after, and I located a gentleman in Pennsylvania that had met the photographer the year before he died and bought one group from all of his Pennsylvania work, which will be coming together on a book, hopefully starting this year.
Great.
Unfortunately, I don't have the studio ledger, which is the dream to find with a collection like this. The best thing I could do is just try to save the plates that were left, figure out if there was a numbering system, and then luckily I found this other part of the collection. So it's pretty amazing.
Truly.
Adam, how did you put out the call? What did you find successful as a ways to gather more information about the biography of this person?
Well, it's been really hard because, Ancestry.com and newspapers.com and Google Lens is really helpful. But it turns out that Sid and his wife, who both lived in this little town of Afton, and she was the society editor for their little newspaper, they kind of had a quiet life. There wasn't a lot to be said about either of them, which I found unfortunate, because I want to know more about the man. And I could tell a lot through his photography, but there's not a lot about him. I know he went back to Pennsylvania and died in the house that he was born in. And I've seen some of the clippings and advertisings, but there was nothing really that they went into about the man.
That's one of the biggest challenges. I mean,
Sure.
I've published over 40 books, and I've explored the form of biography from a lot of different vantage points.
I've come at this from every angle you could imagine, including working with a friend who does scans for museums and researching sections of photos where he said, oh, that looked like Santa Fe because they did that kind of concrete in 1934. And I'd just be like, well, how did you even know that? And I found a negative recently that had a cab in front of the Eagle gas station in Afton, Oklahoma, with military guys standing around, World War II guys. And the cab said East Los Angeles. So I was going, all right, this can't be from Afton, even though that's the Afton station. What's the story? And then I find out through my friend, Tom Robinson, said, oh, I found 6 articles on this. Of course he did, because he's magic like that. And this was a bunch of sailors, World War II guys, trying to get back to see their honeys at the end of the war. And the most economical way to do it was this cab driver, Harry, who drove them the whole of Route 66 and then to New York.
Huh.
So
Wow.
these stories, peeling back layers, these wonderful things keep happening. So at first it was just going to be a book about this S.J. Tyler. And I realized, I'm not a writer. I have a couple articles out there, but I need to find out about the people. And I need to find out more of these stories before I create this whole profile of who this person was and really what the story's about.
I think that's very important if you can do that.
I'm doing it.
That's good. It sounds like you are.
Thank you.
Adam, you've added in the whole Route 66 portion of making sense of the images from that vantage point, and that has the added cachet that Route 66 is coming upon its 100th anniversary year. How has that expanded the scope and the import of the project?
Well, 2 things. One, it blew my mind, the coincidence of that. And it also caused my anxiety to spike to no level, because how do I get a show when museums take 15 months to 5 years to book a show out? How do I get corporations to fund this project at the last minute, at the end of the year when they don't do that? And how do I show a diverse group of photos in a very red state? Because you're not supposed to say DEI or diversity. So on every level, it raised the bar for me, having to figure out how to print these without bringing the glass plates into the darkroom, how to pay the scanner, how to pay the place that's printing them from computer to darkroom. How do I get a little exhibition book together so I have something at the museum? And how do I take this on the road? And I essentially had 3 months to figure this out.
Wow.
So it's completely changed my life. I'm very excited, and I hope it works out. I'll just say that. Because I have the space and I have the first 2 months to kick off the Centennial in Tulsa. But after that, I'm really not clear on the future.
Well, this seems like a good time to take a short break, so let's stand up, stretch, shake it out, or if you're already standing, have a seat and relax. And when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Alan Govenar and Adam Forgash and explore more about the creative processes they use.
Looking for great deals this holiday season? How about big discounts on OM system cameras like the OM1 and OM3, the portable, packable Micro Four Thirds mirrorless cameras that make the perfect partner to accompany you on your journeys? Get $400 savings on the compact OM1, which captures crisp, highly detailed stills and video with enhanced weather protection and fast, accurate autofocus, ideal for wildlife, sports, and outdoor enthusiasts. For cityscapes and urban street scenes, save $200 on the OM3, which comes in a classic SLR design that captures stunning stills and cinema-quality video. Features like AI detection autofocus and robust image stabilization assist on your creative adventures. Add an OM1 or OM3 camera body to your existing lens kit, or camera and lens kits are available that arrive ready for your next expedition. Head on over to bnh.com for the OM System OM1 and OM3 holiday discounts until January 11th by using the link in our podcast show notes.
And we're back with Alan Govenar and Adam Forgash. Now, before the break, we talked a little bit about you guys' histories as storytellers, but there's an interesting point here in that you guys came from completely different schools of education. Alan, yours a little more formal, and Adam at the hands of the flea market crowd. So this is kind of an interesting dynamic, though.
Yeah, it was like going to university in the trenches of the New York City antique flea market. It's highly aggressive, angry people with flashlights trying to rip through your car before you got the stuff out. And a lot of trial and error and a lot of bad mistakes on my part, historically, you know.
For me, my instincts toward wanting to collect things started when I was growing up in inner city Boston, in Dorchester. And I was really interested in these little blue stamps that they put on cigarette packs.
Yeah.
I mean, no one in my family smoked cigarettes, but I just could not get enough of these. And I filled this lunchbox that was packed with these, and I kept it for a long time. And I just had it in my closet. When I was at college, my parents found it and threw it away.
Oh. When did you start collecting?
I was probably 5 or 6 when I was collecting
wow.
cigarette stamps.
Yeah.
But, to speak to your point in terms of New York City flea markets, while we were on break, I was thinking there is a collection I bought at the Chelsea market.
That's me.
Okay. Well, this was a very interesting Black photography collection. I had heard about it, and it was a Dr. Nesbitt from New York City. And in this collection, it had lots of historically important Black photographers that had photographed his family, which was clearly educated and fairly well-to-do for the times. And I came to New York and got it at the Chelsea flea market.
That market to this day, it went from 7 lots down to 1 little lot, but it's becoming special again because people are finding that level of famous photographers, daguerreotypes, Leicas, folk art, whatever it is you want, it's come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are getting sick of eBay and Etsy and all those things. So I still bring museum level stuff there. It's just that people don't really understand it anymore. So I have to re-educate, which is part of my shtick. I like talking to people.
Yeah.
And I like to tell stories. So it is still a very fun place and a very good place to find rare items.
Truly. To what you were talking about earlier in terms of wanting to research the life of the photographer, to know more about the person. The last major collection that was acquired was gifted to Documentary Arts and the Texas African American Photography Archive. It was the work of a small town photographer in Texas, Alonzo Jordan. Our archive was one of the few independent archives in the country to ever receive funding from the National Archives in Washington. We had funding for 3.5 years. And the last year, we were also working with the archives of historically Black colleges in East Texas. And there was a Black history professor at Wiley College whose wife was from Jasper, Texas. And she knew the widow of this photographer. And he was a consummate community person. He was a barber. He was a Sunday school teacher. He was an elder in the church. And he had died in the 1980s. And the story of this photographer, in part, is the focus of my newest documentary feature that's premiering at Cinema Village on November 14th.
Congratulations.
And it's called Quiet Voices in a Noisy World: The Struggle for Change in Jasper, Texas. This photographer had died in the 1980s. By the time of the lynching of James Byrd, his work was just stored in this barbershop, and a storm had kind of ripped off the roof, and I went to see it, and I met with his widow, and she gifted the collection. And part of that story is what informs my film.
Interesting.
But over the years, I've done various exhibitions, and most major exhibition was at the International Center of Photography in New York. In 2011, it was called Jasper, Texas, the Community Photographs of Alonzo Jordan. And it really became 2 shows that were connected, or 2 galleries of the same show. And in one gallery, it was the photographs of Alonzo Jordan. And before you entered the gallery, it was 2 video installations. And I did a human-sized video monitor with life-size people talking about the photographer. So that was how I found out more about the person.
Right.
Was by finding people who had been photographed by him.
Yeah.
And finding people who knew the photographer or had some connection. In your case, that's impossible.
It actually happened when we were out in the Afton area on Route 66. We got all the senior citizens together, and I told that story about the sundown signs. And there was a Cherokee elder woman there, and she identified one of the buildings in town as one of the orphanages. I don't know if it was one of the notoriously bad ones, but she actually identified one of the women as a Quapaw Native American, but it was the only one person we could identify because this woman was 80 and she said she played with the children. But every time I go out there or talk to the family, I find more information.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's just this constantly unfolding story, you know.
It sounds like there's a lot of serendipity on your side, Adam, where like the pieces coming together. I was interested as far as how you guys both go into the very beginning of a project and what informs the choices of which media you're going to work with and how you start beginning to synthesize the telling of the story.
Oh, I'm the complete opposite of Alan. I made a documentary that took me 14 years. I didn't even know what a narrative or a storyboard was. I rolled into it like I was doing a report for 60 minutes.
It's just cannonball right into it?
Yeah. And somebody said to me, are you paying for this? And I said, yeah. They go, out of your own pocket. And I said, well, yeah, how else would I do it? So I come at things sometimes completely harebrained or flying by the seat of my pants. I've had these kind of collections over the last 30 years and kind of let them go. But this one, I knew there was something special about it. So as soon as I realized what I was looking at, I stopped. I put it in climate control storage. I got archival paper to put it in. I started a numbering system. So for me, it's always been willy-nilly, if you will, just kind of threw myself into it. But this one I'm actually taking very seriously, and it feels pretty good. You know, at 57 to get more serious about my craft, realizing that I am a photo historian, even though I don't have a degree. You know what I mean?
How quickly did you ascertain the import of this treasure trove? As soon as you saw this, you were like, okay, this is a really big deal.
It was 8,000 negatives, and the first 2,200 were 4x5 glass negatives from a guy who shouldn't have been shooting glass negatives of Babe Ruth's last game and, you know, the three DiMaggio brothers and Amelia Earhart. So I concentrated on that. And then the second part was all this crazy medical stuff out of Berlin. And when I got to the stuff that I'm doing now with this Sid Tyler, I didn't really think much of it, to be honest, at first, because the first 500 plates were baby photos that were going to be made into late cabinet cards.
Right.
And then once I found the diversity, I realized what I had. And then I found the envelope and I said, whoa. Plus this Tulsa connection keeps pulling me back. I'm a New Yorker. So it was very weird that the Oklahoma connection came back. So that's when I got very serious. And I also at the time was going through a medical problem. And I used that time to really research every day for about 3.5 months.
How important was the idea of Route 66? Let's backtrack a little bit. Maybe there's some listeners who don't understand the significance of Route 66.
I agree.
Can we talk about that for just a quick moment?
Absolutely. So my wife and I were on the road for about 4 years. We did like a pickers type thing. And she got a little tired of it and said, I want to go back to corporate. She said, let's move to Oklahoma. And I said, goodbye, see ya. And she's like, come on. I said, all right. And we moved downtown Tulsa, which was kind of an oasis for a New York City Democrat who's a little bit on the liberal side. And we kept saying, so where's the cool Route 66 stuff? And people really couldn't point it out. And I had been driving cross country for 32 years and doing landscape photography. So there's not a lot of Route 66 excitement left. And that's why I'm working with this Route 66 Alliance, because they're trying to bring it back for the next 100 years. So the centennial's here, and they say, the Mother Road is everything, but nobody knows what the Mother Road is outside of that area. So to me, Route 66 was always the dream. I'm going to drive the whole route. I'm going to take photos. I'm going to make a book. But it's been done a zillion times.
Right.
So for me, this is helping bring back the importance of Route 66, celebrating it, and just showing people that it's still there. They're remembering it. They're building it up again. It's historic. It's really America.
Adam, we've talked a lot about how these projects have come together and the backstory behind everything. I'm interested in the impact on the communities and the impact on, the people who you're sharing these works with, and in the not just the communities of color. Obviously, we're talking about Black photographers and the community in that sense, but also Oklahoma, Texas, these immediate communities that are affected by these projects, and you would think would benefit from the spotlight that these works are shining on these various communities.
The strange part of all of this is that 101 Archer Space, which is like a 4-story museum across from my old apartment, is also 3 blocks from where the Black Wall Street Massacre happened. Okay? And around the same time was Killers of the Flower Moon, if you've seen or read that story. And without saying that these people were connected, it's the same period, it's the same clothing, it's the same time, and it's a time when African Americans were prosperous in this town before the massacre happened. So I think it will have an impact. Now, I must say that this collection isn't 50% African American. It's maybe 25% African American. But I want to be very involved with the Greenwood section where the massacre happened. I've reached out to all the Muskogee and Cherokee and Osage. I think it's going to be important because I think people are going to feel pride to see these photos from a time where people were still in blackface or making Native Americans say how, and, like they're overdoing it and degrading them. So I think it's really important. And I think the opening, I have people coming from every walk of life, and including some Native American filmmakers and other people. And I would like to be able to donate pictures to all these different groups at some point, and maybe even get the negatives into a local institution out there.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Because that is the end point for me with the Jordan collection. We preserved and digitized these thousands of images that were gifted to the archive by the photographer's widow. We are now returning to this little town and to the African American community a digital archive of all of this work, because I think that's truly important. Even when we did the exhibition in New York at the ICP, we did a concurrent show that was copy prints in Jasper. We did public discussions in both places. The hallmark of documentary arts has been sustained engagement and public outreach. So documentary arts has worked in this community for nearly 30 years. Many of my projects span decades. And I think that's so important because it not only establishes the relevance of this work from the past to the present, but it provides a service to the people that it's about.
I agree.
Who in today's world are often deprived from getting the full story.
Well, I've always been somebody who is big against bullies and racism and anti-Semitism. And I think that this show is going to help people equalize, maybe. It's not the negative stories of the Black Wall Street Massacre or the Killers of the Flower Moon. It's more showing that, look, we're all Americans, and this is what was happening during this time. Maybe to be a positive, because that's what Oklahoma needs at this point.
Well, I think that is, once again, very important. If you're interested, there are 2 exhibitions that Documentary Arts is involved with at the Center for Photography at Woodstock in Kingston. There's one exhibition that opened on September 20th, and they're running through January 11th. But one of the exhibitions is called Everyday Culture, 7 Projects of Documentary Arts, curated by Brian Wallace. And it focuses on 7 of our projects that connect to a lot of these issues that we're discussing. And the second show is called Kinship and Community, Selections from the Texas African American Photography Archive, that's curated by Nicole Fleetwood. So you might want to check those out.
Absolutely.
I think the work you've been doing is great. I can't wait to see the publications and other pieces of the film that you're doing.
Well, it will be a film eventually. Like I said, I did a 14-year documentary on a personal subject, and it pretty much damn near bankrupted me. And I'm not ready to do another film again before I'm ready. So it's probably going to be a documentary short, and it probably won't be for at least 2 years because I want to be thorough.
Oh, yeah.
Can we talk about funding these projects? Because that's something that clearly, I mean, you've mentioned it a couple times. I'm like, is Adam just sitting here lifting couch cushions to scrape together? Where does the funding come from?
Well, that's the problem. How do I put this? Derek and I both have an acquaintance who I did a trip with across country in a big Winnebago that said Snapple all over it in decals. And we did this for 3 months. And now it's 24 years later, and I want to wrap a cargo van that I will be moving the show from museum to museum or pop-up to pop-up that's wrapped in Route 66 Alliance, B&H camera, Dodge, beer, whatever it is. So I'm trying to get sponsorship to take this thing on the road for the whole year. I don't know if it's going to happen. It's kind of a pipe dream right now. But for right now, through the Route 66 Alliance, I'm asking for donations to help just to finish printing the show. I've already got about 14,000 into the scanning and some of the other work. But fundraising is ridiculously hard, especially if you go through like a Kickstarter and it doesn't work. Plus, you don't want to be putting your hand out all the time asking for donations. This month, all I do every day is cold call and write emails and ask people if they're interested.
By the way, Adam, do you think there has been an actual on-the-ground shift with this new administration and their efforts to quell that kind of discussion?
Absolutely. You know, I said to my wife, who's also a photo nerd and a collector, I said, this is the hardest time in history. I said, the government's shut down. It's a red state. People don't want to hear about diversity. It's the end of the year, and this is at the 25th hour. And they're trying to shut down all the artist grants. So this is actually the worst time to pick to do something like this, other than it's the centennial of Route 66. Right. And I think it's important. So, you know, I hope it works. There's a chance it won't. I have the space. I have the pictures picked out. I have everything ready to go. We'll just see if it happens, because this is a very bad time.
Adam, is the Route 66 Alliance a registered nonprofit?
Oh, yeah.
And can you umbrella under them for fundraising?
I'm glad you asked, because I wasn't sure what to do for a long time, because I am not a 501(c)(3). And they said, well, use this as what's called a pass-through. So anybody who wants to donate, it's very transparent, and all the money would go towards the printing, the restoration, moving the art from place to place. So yes, thank you for asking that, because it's so helpful. The guy who Joe Biden put in charge of the Route 66 Alliance is named Michael Wiles. And he's famous for writing books, but he's also famous for the movie Pixar Cars. He was the voice of the sheriff. And he's this interesting 80-year-old guy who, when I read his dossier, I was a little intimidated to call him because he's an ex-Marine and a biker. So I'm thinking, I don't know if this guy's going to be into this. And when I called him, he said, this is great. When do we start? And I was like, excuse me? He's like, perfect. And it turns out we were neighbors in Tulsa, like 2 buildings down from each other. And he basically said, I know it's last minute, but I'm going to call everybody I can because I totally believe in this project. And it's from his backyard. He's from there. So it's very exciting that there's all this, outpouring of courtesy and charity. But like I keep saying, it's last minute. So I'm not sure if it's going to happen.
The funding climate certainly is very complicated these days. Documentary Arts over the years is a nonprofit. I've never been a full-time executive director. I've never gotten a conventional salary. Documentary Arts is a network of like-minded people internationally who come together to work on different projects. And this is the way I wanted to proceed. I never wanted to be in conflict of interest to myself because I'm very active in my own creative life as a writer. And As a nonprofit, it certainly has had its benefits because we've been able to get funding from foundations and from contributions of different sorts. Everything that documentary arts has made, we intend to gift to public institutions.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to do that these days as well, given the politics of the times.
Yeah.
Not even that, but museums and historical societies were so spoiled during COVID because a lot of people saw their mortality and decided to donate their collections. So if I called a museum tomorrow and offered a collection, they would not only ask me to pay an endowment, but to also have it shipped and taken care of.
Exactly. That's become a real dilemma because there are so many amazing collections that are out there. I will also say, in light of what you're talking about in terms of budgeting, I'm a very low budget filmmaker. And as the technology we're talking about, the media tools have grown in terms of efficacy. My last 2 or 3 documentary features, I've shot the majority of the footage with my iPhone.
Huh.
And I'm very good at that.
I used to yell at people for that. I'd say it's sacrilegious, but it's because I'm a snob. And then when I started using the iPhone, I went, oh, I'm wrong.
Well, I'm shooting 24 frames per second with 4K video, and I still work with professional cinematographers who use professional gear. It's not to say I'm not a professional myself, but I'm talking about people who this is their day job, who have the latest, newest equipment. But to use the iPhone and to use this kind of technology, you have to know its limitations. It's not open-ended. It's like all the technical things we're going through to get this podcast to work. You need to know what microphone. Sound is a big issue with iPhones. So there's all kinds of things. I wrote a foreword to a book that was published in England by Bart Weiss. It's called Smartphone Cinema. And it's an exhaustive kind of study of the use of smartphones. And it's constantly changing every 6 months. And so the technology advances have made a certain kind of low budget filmmaking more possible than ever.
Well, exactly. And I like getting older and realizing the fact that I'm wrong about a lot of things. And, I was complaining about digital for years, 20 years ago, until my wife said to me, you use digital every day for online auctions. And I went, oh, you're right. So I was wrong about the iPhone. And some of the films that I see that use iPhones are amazing.
It is, but one has to be careful. You can't fool yourself.
Wow, this has been a fascinating discussion about photo archives and the role that they can play in rediscovering forgotten histories. So I really want to thank you both for joining us today. But before we go, what do both of you have in the works for the immediate future, and where can our listeners learn more about your work? Alan, let's start with you.
For me personally, my website, documentaryarts.org, is current. Please check out Truth in Photography. Coming up most immediately is the world premiere of my new feature film, Quiet Voices in a Noisy World, The Struggle for Change in Jasper, Texas, at Cinema Village here in New York City. And it is showing alongside of 12 of my other films. But also you can check out my films on Amazon Prime and other streaming platforms. And my work is very much out there. But as I used to joke, it's still available in lesser known places everywhere.
And Adam, where can we see more of your happenings and goings on with this project and your future projects?
So I'm just working with a PR person now. We're just going to go basic Instagram, Facebook, Faces of the Mother Road, and that'll be built up more starting this week. So I do think by next week, if you look at Facebook or Instagram under Faces of the Mother Road, you will find a lot of information. 2 articles are being written. More people are getting involved. I have people who want to contribute stories about this. And Really, that's it. We're not sure if we're going to do a full website yet, but the most important thing is that I get the word out about January 2nd in Tulsa for the opening of the show.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank both of you guys. This was such an engaging conversation. I think we answered as much as we opened up about questions we want to explore later in our own stories. So I want to thank you guys for your time and for the wonderful stories.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to all of you out there listening, thank you for joining us today. If you are a fan of the show but are not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm your host, Derek Fosbender. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein, and our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to OM System for sponsoring this week's episode.